The night it happened, the sound that stayed with me wasn't the shouting or the rain or even the siren. It was the click of metal closing around my wrists, sharp and final, like someone slamming a door on a life I thought I understood. In that moment, with my cheek pressed against cold pavement and a stranger's weight on my back, one thought kept looping in my head. This is how quickly people decide who you are. Not by your words, not by your years, not by the choices you've made, but by a glance, a bias, a story they invent, because it's easier than asking the truth. And yeah, I know how dramatic that sounds, but if you've ever been misjudged in a way that could have cost you everything, you know exactly what I mean. It was just after midnight, one of those damp, quiet suburban nights where the streets feel abandoned and every sound carries too far. I was driving home after a long day, the kind that leaves you mentally wrung out your body moving on habit alone. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. I had music on low hands, steady on the wheel. Mind finally starting to slow down after hours of pressure and decisions. The car I was driving wasn't subtle, I'll give you that. It was a classic restored piece by piece over years, my escape project. My way of reminding myself I was more than my job. To me, it meant patience, discipline, weekends sacrificed to something that made me feel human again. To someone else, it apparently meant I didn't belong. I saw the flashing lights in my mirror before I heard anything. Red and blue cutting through the dark, bouncing off wet asphalt. I sighed, not annoyed, just tired, and pulled over cleanly. Engine off, window down, hands visible. I've always believed that if you do everything right, things usually turn out fine. That belief took a serious hit that night. He didn't walk up to my car, he swaggered. That was the first thing I noticed. The confidence wasn't calm or professional. It was sharp, performative, like he'd already decided how this interaction would go. His flashlight beam went straight into my eyes. "License and registration," he said, clipped impatient. I told him where they were, moved slowly, did everything by the book. Still, his tone stayed hostile, like my compliance was somehow an insult. "What's a car like this doing out here?" he asked, eyes flicking from my face to the interior, then back again. Not curiosity, accusation. I answered calmly, because I've learned that losing your temper only feeds people like that. He smirked. Made a comment about neighborhoods, about money, about how things didn't add up. I could feel it then, that shift in the air when you realize you're not dealing with facts anymore, you're dealing with someone else's story about you. When he told me to step out of the car, I hesitated just long enough to ask why. That was my mistake. His jaw tightened. He said something about a broken light, about suspicious driving. I knew it didn't make sense, and part of me wanted to explain, to slow things down, to appeal to reason. Another part of me knew better. So I stepped out. The rain hit me immediately, soaking through my jacket. Before I could even fully turn, his hand grabbed my arm, hard, twisting it behind my back. My chest hit the side of my car. Breath knocked out of me. "Spread your feet," he barked, like he was talking to a problem, not a person. I tried to speak, tried to explain who I was, why this was unnecessary. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Everyone's got a story," he said. "Save it." That's when the cuffs went on. Too tight. Deliberately tight. The kind that aren't about safety, they're about control. Pain shot up my arms, and for the first time that night, fear crept in. Not fear that I'd done something wrong, but fear that it didn't matter. Fear that I could do everything right and still end up crushed by someone else's ego. Another patrol car pulled up. A younger officer stepped out, eyes darting between me, the car, and his partner. You could tell immediately he was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't quite fit. He asked a few quiet questions. Asked if the plates had been run. The answer was no. That alone should have changed everything. Instead, it just hardened the first officer's resolve. He shoved me toward the back seat of his cruiser like he needed to prove something. On the drive to the station, I stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, forcing myself to breathe through the pain in my shoulders. I could hear him talking, muttering about charges, about teaching me a lesson. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was casual, like this was just another story he'd tell later, another notch in his belt. The station was bright and loud after the dark road buzzing with fluorescent lights and the low hum of exhaustion. He marched me in listing charges out loud like he wanted an audience. Theft, resisting, disorderly conduct. The words stacked up fast, none of them real. A desk officer looked at me, then at him, then back at me again. Something in his expression shifted. He took my wallet, flipped it open, paused, looked again. His face drained of color. Suddenly the room felt very quiet. Things moved fast after that. Phones ringing, doors opening, people standing straighter, voices dropping an octave. The confidence drained out of the officer who'd arrested me, replaced by something ugly and frantic. He tried to talk his way out of it, tried to rewrite what had happened in real time, but stories fall apart when they're built on lies. I sat there, wrists aching, rainwater drying on my clothes, watching the system pivot around me. It was surreal. The same rules that had been ignored minutes earlier were now being treated like sacred text. Apologies started flying careful and rehearsed. Someone offered to take the cuffs off. I told them to wait. Not because I wanted sympathy, but because I wanted accountability. I wanted the process to matter. By the time I walked out of that building free, the officer who'd put me in cuffs was the one being led away. Cameras were already outside. Questions shouted into the night air. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of making noise all on its own. The months that followed were a blur of hearing statements and long nights replaying everything in my head. People called me brave, called it justice, called it karma. But the truth is messier than that. There was no moment where it suddenly felt good. There was relief, sure, and a deep sense of validation, but also anger that it had happened at all. Anger that so many others didn't have the same outcome because they didn't have the same protections, the same luck. The trial, when it finally came, wasn't dramatic in the way movies make you expect. It was methodical. Evidence laid out piece by piece. Footage played. Words spoken back in the cold light of a courtroom stripped of swagger and bravado. When the verdict came down, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just felt quiet, like something heavy had finally been set down. Years later, long after the headlines faded, I ran into him again. Not in a courtroom, not in a station, in a place neither of us would have predicted. He was older, thinner, kneeling on concrete scrubbing wheels at a car wash. I almost didn't recognize him at first. Power has a way of disguising people, and losing it strips them bare. He looked up. Recognition hit him like a wave. There was no anger in his eyes, just something hollow. He apologized. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a cracked, simple apology, the kind that comes after everything else is gone. I listened. I didn't forgive him on the spot. Forgiveness isn't a performance, but I acknowledged him. I paid him for his work. I told him something I believe with my whole chest, that the law is just a tool. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. In the right ones, it's a shield. And every day we're choosing which one we're holding. I drove away that day feeling lighter, not because I'd won, but because I'd seen the full arc of what unchecked power can do and what accountability, however imperfect, can undo. So here's where I want to leave it, and I really want you to think about this before you scroll away. What would you have done in my place? Would you have pushed back? Stayed quiet? Let it go? And what about his place? How many times have we seen people confuse authority with force with respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue if you need to. Share a story you've seen or lived through, because if we don't talk about these moments, if we don't question them, they don't disappear. They just wait for the next person on the next dark road under the next set of flashing lights.